Mimo was a troubled kid who suffered abuse in his own home at the hands of his mother's new boyfriend after his father's death. The poor boy endured daily beatings and received barely any food, cowering in a corner as his horrible mother ignored his cries of pain, absorbed in watching television. As he grew older, Mimo became a lonely, weak child with no confidence. He wakes up from a nightmare of being beaten by his stepfather to the sound of Shu, the class bully, tormenting a kind girl named Aya. Shu snatches her book, mocking her for reading girly novels, unable to grasp that a girl would naturally read such books. Mimo imagines how, in a TV show, he would stand up to the bully and earn everyone's admiration. However, he knows that in reality, no one on the bus cares, and if he stands up for Aya, his weak frame will only get him beaten up. Most popular students support Shu, while the others laugh along to avoid becoming targets themselves. The teacher is useless, asleep, as Shu relentlessly demands Aya's phone number. Before he realizes it, Mimo stands up, looking Shu in the eye, and tells him to leave Aya alone. Shu laughs, calling him a simp and weak, when suddenly Kiri, the most popular guy in class, intervenes and tells Shu to give the book back. Shu obeys, returning the book to Aya before moving on to bully another nerd, Yasu. Mimo questions why he stood up for Aya, an unusual act for him, but before he can dwell on it, everyone on the bus is transported to a different world. They find themselves in a completely unknown place, staring at a beautiful deity standing atop a bridge. She introduces herself as the goddess Visi. Visi explains that whenever the threat of a demon king arises, the kingdom of Alien summons brave warriors from another world to defend their realm. 200 years ago, the demon king nearly destroyed their kingdom. But thanks to some heroes, the Demon King was defeated, and the demon army was annihilated. Unfortunately, the Demon King has resurrected, which is why they have all been teleported to this world, to fight as the new heroes who will put an end to the Demon King. The students are utterly confused, wondering if they are dead or if this is some kind of prank. Their teacher instructs them to stay quiet, and listen to what the goddess has to say. Mimo looks at the ancient architecture, the soldiers wearing armor and holding spears, and the goddess with her golden eyes. He pinches himself to check if he is dreaming. Kiri speaks up and asks the goddess what will happen if they don't cooperate. Visi smiles and claims that she won't be able to send them back to their world. Kiri asks if there really is a way to return, and Visi replies that there is a reverse summoning ritual which can send them back. However, to perform it, they must kill the Demon King to obtain a special part called the evil element, which only drops upon his death. Shu screams at her for bringing them to a new world without giving them a choice and refuses to help. Visi goes down on one knee, begging them to save her kingdom from destruction. Aya speaks up, expressing that they are just humans who can't do anything. Visi promises that they have abilities they never knew about. Shu still thinks this is a joke, so Visi decides to prove it. She calls forth a prisoner of war and a giant demon dog. She releases the demon dog, which immediately lunges at the prisoner and kills him. Some of the girls are horrified and fall to their knees. Visi looks at the demon, chants a spell, and blasts the monster into flames, erasing it from existence. She then calls the students forward to measure their latent ability. One by one, the students walk up to a crystal ball, which glows in different colors. After the nerds are done, Shu steps up to the crystal. As soon as he places his hand over it, the crystal glows a bright red color. The goddess looks pleased and announces that Shu has a rank skills. Finally, Kiri steps forward. As soon as he places his hand over the crystal ball, it glows a bright golden color before exploding. After that, Aya approaches, and she too is revealed to be S rank. Following her, another girl steps up and also turns out to be S rank. The guards are completely shocked, and Visi explains that having even one S rank individual is extremely lucky, but to have 3 is unreal. Finally, Mimo walks up to the crystal. When he puts his hand over it, the ball glows a dim purple. The goddess doesn't give him a second glance and tells the next person to come up. Mimo tries to ask what rank he is, but she completely ignores him. He walks away, realizing that even in this world, he is destined to be a background character. After that, Yasu, the nerd, steps up to the crystal. He turns out to have a special dark ability, which another dark hero possessed a while ago, and became the strongest. Finally, everyone checks their stats, and the goddess tells them that they also have a personal ability that varies from person to person. She then announces that they have to perform a critical ritual. She calls Mimo to the front, and a guard immediately pushes him forward. She sends him below into a dark pit, claiming that Mimo is E-ranked, the lowest in the entire class. Historically, E-ranked individuals have caused a lot of trouble, so they are usually killed. However, since this time they got so many amazing heroes, she will give the E-ranker a chance to save his life. He will be sent to the abandoned ruins, a dungeon far away where criminals and monsters are sent. She tells him that if he manages to survive, they will leave him alone and he will earn the right to live. Otherwise, he can kiss his life goodbye. Mimo tries to argue, claiming that he can get better, but the goddess replies that he falls into the category of failure frame. This means his stats are so low that even with intense training, he cannot improve. Furious, Mimo tells the goddess that he never chose to come here. He was summoned against his will and now is being disposed of. Kiri cuts him off, saying that he is wasting everyone's time as the girls are already tired. Everyone agrees with Kiri, and Mimo falls to the ground, defeated. When Yasu walks up to him, Mimo remembers the time he helped Yasu after he got bullied. However, Yasu rejects him, telling him that an E-ranker should talk with more respect to their superiors. Mimo loses all hope as the goddess commences the ritual, throwing a leather bag as his special item, which turns out to be completely useless. Aya tries to defend Mimo, saying that this is wrong. Frustrated beyond belief, Mimo raises his arm and uses the paralyze spell on the goddess. She easily blocks it, calling Mimo a loser for even trying to hit her with his E-ranked skills. Kiri also tries a spell, creating a huge fireball, claiming he was just testing it with a small amount of mana. Everyone laughs at the power difference between a loser like Mimo and themselves. Mimo lowers his head as tears fall down his cheeks, remembering how his younger self used to cry. Suddenly, a voice within him tells him to stop pretending to be good and show them his true nature, the side he has been repressing for so long. Finally letting go, Mimo looks up with hate-filled eyes and tells the goddess that she is a rotten hag, warning her to be ready for him if he ever returns alive. He is immediately transported into a dark cave. Trying to open his status, he fails due to the low light. He pours some mana into the leather bag, making the gem inside glow. Using it as a lantern, he moves through the cave, suddenly realizing he is walking on skeletons. Fear grips him as he wonders what could have killed all these people. A monster attacks him, and he barely dodges, running away with all his might. He thinks about turning around to fight but knows the level difference is too great. He would die the moment he stops. Crying out of fear, he trips over a rock and falls. Facing imminent death, frustration over his life takes command of his body. Just as the monster is about to kill him, Mimo makes a last-ditch effort and shoots the paralyze spell, surprisingly petrifying the monster in place. He immediately gets up and runs away, soon reaching the end of the cave where another bird demon approaches with murderous intent. Mimo raises his arm again and uses the paralyze spell, freezing the enemy once more. Realizing his spell works, he starts feeling tired and opens his stats, noticing his mana is almost depleted. He tries casting a poison spell on the monster, which works effectively, causing the demon to turn black and bleed. Sitting on the cave floor, Mimo wonders why his spells are so effective against these demons when he hears something behind him. Turning around, he sees the Minotaur demon has broken free from the spell and is ready to strike. Instead of running away, all the hatred for everyone who treated him badly resurfaces. Even though he is completely exhausted, he raises his arms towards the demon, determined to kill to live his life, and challenges the demon to fight him, uncertain if he will survive this time or not. Tauka sits down to rest and notices that his MP has reached 0. Just then, the Minotaur from earlier catches up to him, indicating that the paralysis effect has worn off. Realizing he's out of MP and unable to defend himself, Tauka reflects that if he were a hero, someone would come to save him. However, as a mere background character, he must rely on his own strength to survive. Despite his dire situation, he doesn't give up and prepares to fight. He recalls that he should still have some natural MP not reflected in his stats. However, he worries about what will happen once he exhausts even that. He sweats bullets thinking about the worst-case scenario. Knowing his natural MP won't last until he reaches the surface, he stops worrying and uses Paralyze on the Minotaur, but it doesn't work. He discovers that he can't use the same skill repeatedly on the same target. He then uses Sleep to make the monster fall asleep and follows up with Poison to kill it. He realizes there must be other limitations to his skills, and using his natural MP makes him very tired. As a horde of monsters approaches, he realizes his odds of survival are slim. But he laughs and prepares to fight them all, using Paralyze on as many as he can. He almost depletes his natural MP. His consciousness begins to fade, but he clings to it, using Paralyze over and over despite the growing number of monsters. Just as he is about to give up hope, he gets a notification that he is leveled up to level 258. This refreshes his MP, allowing him to use Paralyze effectively again. he discovers that the minotaur he poisoned earlier has died, providing him with a huge burst of experience. Reinvigorated, he continues to paralyze the monsters in his sight. His paralyzed skill levels up from repeated use, and he wonders if new skills are obtained by leveling them up. However, he focuses on survival for now. He finds he can now target multiple monsters at once with paralyzed. He smugly thinks that the goddess might be the only one immune to his paralyzed skill, and notes that his skill has a limited range of effect. He uses poison on all the paralyzed monsters, leveling up his poison skill as well, viewing the monsters as mere experience points. He checks his stats and sees that they have multiplied with each level gain. His MP is the highest due to his high base MP, which he views as his lifeline, as it enables his unique skill. Running out of MP would mean his end. As he rests, the poison monsters die one by one, allowing him to gain more levels until he reaches level 395. He then puts the remaining monsters to sleep to upgrade his sleep skills. After all the monsters die, he reaches level 501. With his enhanced stats, he feels confident about surviving the dungeon. He attempts to kill the remaining monsters, but they flee. He scavenges a robe and other useful items from a nearby corpse, realizing he also needs food and water. Despite searching, he finds nothing. Remembering the monsters he killed, which resembled cows and chickens, he tries to butcher them, but finds their skin too tough. Desperate, he eats one of their eyeballs, but finds it disgusting and can't swallow it. Exhausted and on the brink of despair, he wonders if he will die like this. Noticing the gem on his leather bag turning partly purple, he channels his magic into it, restoring the gem to normal. Suddenly, the bag feels heavier. Inside, he finds a bottle of cola and a packet of jerky. He eats, feeling saved. Unsure if the bag will produce food again, he spends the next few days trying to navigate his way out of the labyrinth. A few days later, Tauka is surrounded by paralyzed and poisoned monsters, waiting for them to die. As they perish, he gains numerous levels, and the scene before him looks like a massacre. Reflecting on his capabilities, he remembers how, as a child, he wanted to kill his parents for mistreating him. However, his uncle and aunt rescued him from that life, providing a normal environment and teaching him kindness and empathy. He thought he had become like them, but now realizes he was deceiving himself. Even witnessing the massacre, he feels nothing, and this frightens him, but he accepts it as his true nature. As the last monsters die, he notices his level has risen to 957. He says a prayer over some human remains he finds, then continues on. He paralyzes and poisons another monster and notices this area is different from the others he has explored. Finding a crystal similar to the one in his bag, he pours magic into it, opening the door to a room where he finds the remains of a couple who appear to have chosen to die together. With no food or water nearby, he deduces their fate. Searching their belongings, he finds some gems, taking them for potential use on the surface. Exploring other rooms, he encounters one requiring an unusually high amount of mana to open. Inside, he finds another body with a fatal wound and a letter identifying the man as Anglin Bathard, known as the Great Sage or Anglin the Hero of Darkness. Recalling the goddess mentioning him, Tauka learns that Anglin was sent here by the goddess after she deemed him no longer useful. Anglin wanted to entrust his gathered items to someone who could escape alive, knowing he would die here. Tauka thinks the goddess, despite labeling the great demon empire as evil, is far worse, and acknowledges his own dark tendencies. He finds a book of forbidden arts among Anglin's belongings, filled with recipes for magic tools and medicines, which he knows will be useful. He also discovers a scroll of forbidden magic, which he cannot read but believes contains powerful spells. This scroll might be his trump card against the goddess if he can decipher it. Before leaving, he notices a blood-written note warning about the Soul Eater, the creature responsible for everyone's deaths here. Continuing his journey through the ruins, Tauka finds a large gate that he believes leads to the surface, requiring a crystal to open. He realizes the Soul Eater likely possesses this crystal and checks his stats before confronting the monster. With his level now at 1229, he hopes his unique skill will work on the Soul Eater. Upon encountering the Soul Eater, identifiable by the crystal on its forehead, Tauka attempts to use Paralyzed. However, the monster shoots a beam, injuring his hand as soon as it detects his skill activation. Bandaging his hand, he deduces the beam activates instantly when someone tries to attack. He realizes the monster has no openings, making it difficult to use his skills. Knowing he needs to speak a skill's name to activate it, Tauka finds the monster isn't giving him enough time to do so. His unique skill range also limits him from targeting it from a safer distance. He considers grinding more levels, but realizes it won't help if he can't use his skills. As the Soul Eater begins to move, Tauka understands why no one has ever escaped the ruins. Defeating this creature might be his only way out. Meanwhile, outside the ruins, a girl runs from her pursuers. Standing in front of the disposal ruins, she considers hiding there to evade them. Back at the ruins, the Soul Eater doesn't attack Tauka despite knowing his location. Instead, it expels gooey, grotesque material from its mouth, which transforms into monstrous forms. Tauka realizes that the Soul Eater is mimicking the faces of humans it has devoured, reflecting their final expressions before death. This display is meant to gauge Tauka's reaction, amusing the Soul Eater with its vile tastes. Suddenly, the Soul Eater smashes through the wall beside Tauka, but he quickly paralyzes the human-like monsters it has created. However, he hesitates to poison them because they resemble humans too closely. He can't bring himself to kill them with his dreadful poison skill, feeling that he hasn't sunk so low as to kill beings that look human. The Soul Eater, enjoying Tauka's inner conflict, produces even more human-like monsters. Desperately, Tauka pleads with them to stay back, fighting to retain his humanity. But the monsters ignore him, swarming from all sides. The Soul Eater revels in his despair, probably thinking it has found the ultimate prey. Tauka continues to beg the human-like monsters to keep their distance, while the Soul Eater enjoys the spectacle. In his desperation, he cries out for someone to save him, but his pleas go unanswered. Then, noticing the Soul Eater's heightened emotion, he seizes the moment and paralyzes it. He reveals that he was waiting for it to let its guard down, and is relieved it never noticed he kept his arm raised, ready to strike. He explains that those who see themselves as superior often lower their guard around the weak, which is their greatest flaw. His paralysis skill then levels up to 3, and he tells the Soul Eater that all his hesitation and fear were merely an act. He confesses that he spent years trying to appear harmless and normal, fooling even himself into forgetting his true nature. With no hesitation, Tauka poisons the human-like monsters, stating he has no reason to hold back just because they resemble humans. He reflects that having the weakest stats in the ruins led the monsters to underestimate him, allowing him to survive. He marvels at how someone sent for disposal could defeat the powerful Soul Eater. The Soul Eater, enraged by Tauka's arrogance, tries to move but is paralyzed. Tauka notices that it receives damage from attempting to move while paralyzed and poisons it. This action levels up his poison skill to 3, and he uses sleep to put the human-like monsters to rest. Eventually, the Soul Eater dies, releasing the souls it has consumed. The freed spirits thank Tauka for saving them, and the Dark Hero urges him to avenge them against the goddess. As they disappear, Tauka reflects that he feels no obligation to fulfill their request, though he does intend to get back at the goddess regardless. He then takes the crystal from the Soul Eater's forehead, uses it to open the gates of the ruins, and finally escapes. The scene then shifts to the bully from earlier, struggling to kill a monster in the forest, but failing to land the finishing blow. He chases after the monster, while elsewhere, Takuto successfully defeats another monster on his own. Feeling cocky, he reaches level 18, unaware that this achievement is insignificant compared to Tauka's level. Meanwhile, Yasu uses his powers to kill a monster and enjoys the carnage. In another part of the forest, a girl named Kabato hesitates to kill a monster, doubting her ability. Asagi warns her that the monsters will kill her if she doesn't fight back. Asagi gets angry when Kabato addresses her by her last name, threatening to make 70% of the girls in class avoid her. Kabato, feeling devastated and alone in this unfamiliar world, apologizes. Asagi predicts that their class will soon fall apart, explaining that it is filled with selfish people divided by ranks from S to E. Asagi reveals her B rank and explains that faction lines will soon become clearer. She tells Kabato, a D ranker, that she will need to join their faction since she won't be able to join Takuto's group due to her stats. Asuka's prospects don't look good, and the Takao sisters prefer to work alone, leaving Kabato with little choice but to join Asagi's group. Asagi emphasizes the importance of understanding her position and warns that her reputation in this world will affect her standing in their original world after they defeat the Great Demon Empire. Asagi arrogantly suggests that Kabato could use her body to be helpful if her powers are weak. She orders the other girls to bring in a chained monster, confusing Kabato. Asagi insists she kill the monster to complete the goddess's task, pushing her to take a life by reminding her of what happened to Tauka. Reluctantly, Kabato kills the monster, and Asagi accepts her into the group. Devastated by the violence she committed, Kabato cries, recalling how Tauka once saved an injured cat. She apologizes, feeling helpless. Elsewhere, Asuka wakes up, remembering being knocked out by the goddess. Confronting the goddess, she asks what happened to Tauka. The goddess, shedding crocodile tears, explains she had no choice but to send him to the ruins due to strict kingdom policy. Pretending to be sad, she urges Asuka not to cry. The goddess explains that during Asuka's unconsciousness, students were tested on their ability to kill demons, and some were disqualified for their inability to do so. Asuka realizes the goddess is culling the weak, but is not thrilled about it. The goddess claims it's due to kingdom policy, but Asuka doesn't agree with her methods. Viciously, the goddess acknowledges differing opinions and states that those without value need to be discarded. Asuka inquires about the value of S-rank heroes, and since it's high, she offers to cover for those who can't pass, asking the goddess to cancel their banishment. The goddess, pleased with this proposal, agrees, revealing it was her plan all along. She suggests making peace by shaking hands and apologizes insincerely for punching Asuka in the gut. Reluctantly, Asuka shakes her hand, later noting how cold it felt. Meanwhile, near the ruins, the girl from earlier is still running from her pursuers, a group called the White Walkers. One tracker notices the clues she left behind, mocking her poor hiding skills and expressing their enjoyment in chasing her. They arrogantly believe escaping their group is pointless. Elsewhere, Tauka checks his stats outside the ruins, noticing he has reached level 1789 with NP so high, it nearly spills off the screen. He realizes his paralyzed skill has leveled up to 3, allowing him to partially paralyze the head, and he can set his poison to be either lethal or non-lethal. He considers testing these skills on nearby demons and wishes for a sword that could also serve as a shield and handle the vanguard. Entering the forest, he hears a commotion and finds big slimes bullying a baby slime. Sympathizing with the baby slime, Tauka paralyzes the big slimes and uses his poison skill on them, sparing the baby slime. He then threatens the big slimes to leave if they don't want to get wrecked. They flee, and Tauka reassures the baby slime, apologizing for not helping sooner and commending its bravery. He releases it from paralysis, telling it not to attack him. As he tries to leave, the baby slime follows him. Though initially unhappy, Tauka decides to bring the outcast slime along, forming a team of misfits. Afterward, we see the girl from earlier, relieved to have gained some distance from her pursuers, yet still aware of their presence. She realizes they are waiting for her to exhaust herself, a typical White Walker tactic. Meanwhile, Toker reads the Book of Forbidden Arts with the slime watching his back. He considers the slime's company worthwhile for the added protection, and notices a potion in the book that could strengthen the slime. Toka surmises that Anglin hid the book to prevent its misuse. He then tells the slime about his vow to take revenge on the shitty goddess, and asks if the slime wants to join him in his selfish mission. The slime is eager to follow him, and Toka names it Piggy Maru after the sounds it makes. The slime enjoys its new name, and Toka resolves to do whatever it takes to defeat the goddess. As he declares his intent for revenge, the girl's pursuers close in on her. Unable to shake them off, she decides to use her ace, the spirit regalia, her spirit equipment. However, before she can face them, the White Walkers encounter Toka. Pretending to be scared, Toka faces the armed men who try to rob him, mocking his filthy appearance. One suggests sparing him if he surrenders, but another insists on killing him regardless. Their captain tells them to be quick since they still need to chase the girl. They agree, uninterested in torturing Toka, and focus on capturing the girl. Discussing their vile plans for her, they fail to notice Toka backing away until it's almost too late. Feigning fear, Toka raises his hand as planned, and when one attacks, he paralyzes him, surprising the others. Toka is pleased to see his ability works on humans, realizing the goddess is the only exception. He arrogantly notes that the White Walkers are less intimidating than the monsters in the ruins, but equally evil. Seeing his slime companion's anger, Toka decides it won't bother him to kill the walkers and poisons them, unbothered by killing humans. After they die, he searches their belongings for anything useful and senses another human nearby. The slime senses it too, and the girl realizes her pursuers have stopped moving. She senses another presence and sees Piggy Maru before Toka paralyzes her. Toka explains he sensed her intent to attack, though it was laced with doubt, indicating she wasn't trying to kill him. Immobilizing her as a precaution, he asks her for information about the area, revealing he is lost and unfamiliar with it. When she asks about her pursuers, he learns they weren't her friends and reveals he killed them. He then partially releases her paralysis, warning her not to act up or he'll cast it again, bluffing since he can't actually overlap the spell. He frees her head so she can speak and explains he remains cautious due to past experiences. The girl, regaining her voice, asks if he killed the men alone, and Toka confirms, with only his slime as a partner. Detecting no lies, she agrees to answer his questions truthfully. Toka realizes she doesn't seem bad and tells her he won't pry into her circumstances if she does the same for him. After questioning her, Toka learns they are in the Urza Kingdom's southern forest. Before releasing her, he asks if she can read the scroll of forbidden magic, but she can't. She tells him it's written in a special ancient script and knows someone who might help. The Forbidden Witch, forced to leave her land due to her knowledge of forbidden things. She directs him to the Golden Demon Zone, a danger zone in the continent's center. Toka thanks her for the information, thinking they are even since he saved her. Toka finds the girl too honest for her own good, worrying about her as he prepares to leave. He tells her she will be free in a few minutes, mentioning he can't guarantee her safety until then, and she realizes the spell has a time limit. Toka leaves, with a slime following, and explains to it that he only kills by his rules. Knowing she might attack him once freed, he asks the slime to watch his back. The slime is thrilled, and Toka moves on. In a nearby town, bounty hunters notice a high bounty poster for the girl, learning she was a holy knight of Nia Kingdom, destroyed by Bakuos, and a former princess of a high elf nation. They conclude anyone capturing her won't resist laying hands on her, revealing her name as Sarah Zashran. One day later, a hooded figure appeared at the gate of the provincial city of Mills Toka Memori, trying to draw as little attention as possible. Noticing the stranger was unarmed, the guard asked if he was a mercenary responding to the call to conquer the ruins. The hooded figure confirmed, and the guard allowed him passage. explaining that the Marquis wanted as many mercenaries as possible at the ruins. Looking for a place to stay, the stranger found an inn where a room cost 2,000 maws per night. Seeing the attendant's suspicious look, the stranger explained that his clothes were dirty from a long and tiring journey. He pulled out a coin of the required amount, instantly brightening the innkeeper's mood. Introducing himself as Hattie Skull, the stranger secured a room. That night, he strolled through the streets, noting the city's secure atmosphere, a stark contrast to the danger-filled life he had known. The medieval fantasy city, with its typical shops and an adventurer's guild, felt like a different world. Before searching for magical items, he indulged in a meal, savoring the rustic flavors of the best food he'd had in a long time. Nearby, men drank and laughed, their high spirits making it easy for the stranger to eavesdrop on regional rumors. The conversation shifted to the most powerful armies on the continent, with knights and monsters mentioned frequently. They debated the Invincible Brigade led by the handsome and mad Emperor Falkendatsen, the Order of the White Wolf in the northern kingdom of Magmar, the Sacred Order of Purging from Yamato to the west, and their own kingdom of Ulza's Order of Monster Hunters. However, they agreed that the greatest force was the Black Dragon Knights of the Bakos Empire, who had exterminated the Holy Empire of Nei. These knights, with their 5 dragons, had faced entire armies and included the strongest human hero, Hunter. Memorizing everything, the stranger, whose real name was Memori, returned to his room and fed Pigamaru. He contemplated his next steps, prioritizing finding someone who could read the scroll of forbidden magic. A woman in the forest had pointed him towards the Witch of Taboos in the land of the golden-eyed monsters. Additionally, he needed to enhance Pigamaru, requiring powdered bone from a skeleton king, which he learned lived in the ruin of Mills. The next day, the provincial marquis, known as Cred the Knower, welcomed the mercenaries gathered to conquer the dungeon. He announced that a new floor had been discovered in the ruin of Mills, and their mission was to explore it and retrieve the Dragon Eye Chalice. The reward for bringing this relic was 300 gold coins. Any other treasures brought back, if not kept by the finders, would also be rewarded. Memori realized this was his chance to get the bone powder he needed. As mercenaries lined up to register, Memori noticed a man named Monk Drojdi harassing a girl, flirting intrusively. The girl remained calm and asked what he wanted. Drojdi compared her to the paladin Siraz Ashrain, a public figure surrounded by myths and with a bounty on her head. Boasting about his encounter with a night princess, he insisted that the girl before him was Siraz Ashrain, recognizing her by her figure. She denied his claim, but he pulled back her hood to reveal human ears, not elf ears as he expected. Embarrassed, Drojdi stepped back as the woman introduced herself as Miss Belucas. After registering, Memori sought supplies for the expedition. Mist, the woman who fended off Drojdi, joined him. Despite wearing a cloak to hide her identity, she flaunted her cleavage. Striking up a conversation, Memori advised her to be cautious, as there were always fools like Drojdi around. He offered to pay her to help him find valuable items, fearing deceit from merchants since he was an outsider. Needing funds for a trip, Mist agreed. They shook hands, reaffirming their false names, and began their search for supplies. Afterward, Memori paid her generously, saving him 3 silver coins with her help. Mist was pleasantly surprised by the amount, but accepted it gratefully. Exhausted from lack of sleep, she nearly collapsed and hurriedly bid farewell to Memori. Pigamaru appeared, silently asking what was next. Memori announced it was time to head to Mill's ruin. Hours into the expedition, Memori hears the shouts of mercenaries encountering a small demon bull, a diminutive version of the Minotaur from the Discard ruin. As the beast ascends the stairs, Memori paralyzes and poisons it, then swiftly plunges his dagger into its hide, discovering it isn't as tough as the creatures from the Discard ruin. Hearing footsteps, he hides behind a wall as the fleeing mercenaries return with a stronger ally to deal with the demon bull. However, they find the monster already dead, the single knife suggesting it was the cause of death. Continuing his path, Momori feels no threat from the weak monsters, as they offer little experience. Determined to reach the more challenging levels, he quickens his pace. Further ahead, Monk Drojdi is paying 2 mercenaries to make the woman who scorned him regret her existence. Consumed by hatred, Drojdi plans to turn her remains into feed after killing her. A description so literal it scares the hired executors, who only care about getting some food. At that moment, Momori appears, declaring the trio beyond salvation. Enraged, the group draws their weapons, but the discarded hero paralyzes them and questions their intent to kill with such tools. This sadistic side of him makes Momori want to vomit, likely due to memories of his parents. His blood boiling, he poisons the mercenaries, confessing that exterminating parasites like them is more satisfying than finding money on the ground. As Drojdi chokes on the poison, he vows to remember this. But Momori laughs, knowing memory won't last long for them. With monsters approaching, Momori leaves the mercenaries to become monster feed. Later, he nears the new floor and decides to take a break before descending. After 3 hours of sleep, he thanks Pigamaru for keeping watch and resumes the journey. Opening one of the ruined doors, he encounters the saber tigers, who warn of strange occurrences in the ruin. Foes, the team's vice captain, explains that monsters have been found dead in a peculiar way, with their skin turning deathly pale. The captain, Lily Adamantine, adds that even the strong monsters are affected. Valuing her group members' safety, she decides to abandon the expedition and asks if Momori wants to leave with them. Feigning indifference, Momori chooses to stay, seeing this news as advantageous since it means less competition for his prize. The next door doesn't hold exactly what he seeks, but the Dragon Eye chalice before him is a great find. A fan of Japanese fiction, Momori knows the gargoyle behind him will come to life if he touches the relic, so he paralyzes and poisons the monster before it can move. He collects the artifact and watches as the beast's neck collapses. Mist Beluka then appears, surprised to see someone else there first. Momori offers her the chalice, explaining he didn't come for it. Skeptical, Mist asks what he wants in return, and he sarcastically replies that Hattie's skull is enough to see the smiles on the beauty's faces in Mills. When she doesn't believe him, he reveals he came for a monster on the deepest floor yet discovered in the ruin. Not wanting to take the chalice for free, Mist offers her help. Seeing her determination, Momori accepts, but insists they avoid personal questions. As they descend, Mist proves her worth with her sword, showing she won't be a burden. She explains that monsters with golden eyes give an obscene amount of experience points, the main way for heroes to level up since killing people doesn't grant experience. Momori then understands why he gained nothing from defeating the Sacred Watchers. Mist adds that some golden-eyed monsters can have good relationships with humans, influenced by the Demon King's essence. Remembering the golden aura around Kirihara Takuto, Momori introduces Pigamaru to Mist when they take a break. He then uses a spell to put her to sleep and rest. With her body at rest, Mist Elf Ear is revealed, showing she is indeed Sira's Ashrain. Meanwhile, the Black Dragon Knights find the Sacred Watchers dead without signs of aggression. Civic Gartland, the strongest of humanity, assumes it was the Night Princess with her spirit armor. The Paladin wakes up, confused about how she fell asleep. Pigamaru seems eager to alert her to something, waking his master with the noise. They continue their journey until they find a room where Momori believes her boss is absent. However, upon hearing a collapsing noise, the duo runs from the sound. A skeleton king then emerges, having dug its way to the surface. Knowing this is a formidable enemy, they double their attention. Ceres recognizes the monster and knows the silver part under its chin needs to be broken. The princess points out that even the saber tigers couldn't handle this opponent, so caution is necessary. Analyzing the creature, Momori believes it sees Ceres as the real threat. The princess announces her intention to use magic to enhance her physical abilities and create exclusive armaments. But since this is a technique she wants to keep secret, she asks Momori to keep it between them. She also apologizes in advance if she cannot protect Momori from this enemy, as she doesn't know its true strength, and urges him to flee if necessary. However, Momori paralyzes and poisons the Skeleton King with ease, leaving Ceres stunned. After defeating the monster, Momori is sent back to Earth. He's thrilled to find what he came for, the bone powder from this monster that allows for the physical enhancement of Pigimaro. Ceres asks if this was the target Momori was looking for, but he keeps it secret, claiming he will answer all questions on the surface. Pigimaro then points in a direction, and Momori finds a strange object shining intensely like magical fabric. Inside the cloth is an egg that Pigimaro wants to take home, so Momori helps, even without knowing what it is. Elsewhere in the dungeon, mercenaries are being chased by skeleton knights, running for their lives. One fighter tries to defeat the monsters, but is repelled without difficulty. Sakura cries because she lost her hand in battle, while a friend rescues her, hoping the goddess will heal her severe wound. On the front line, Ayaka doesn't feel confident enough to advance against the enemy. Omiya Dashago takes the vanguard and delivers the Scarlet Punch, shattering the first skeleton. Right behind, Karara Takudo uses his famous dragon explosion to eliminate the threat once and for all. Having done that, the boy admits he faced formidable opponents, but that he is simply stronger and prevailed. With that, Momori reaches level 24. Outside the dungeon, Ceres Ashrain displays the Dragon Eye Chalice, leaving everyone around her in awe. Isolated from the crowd, Momori concludes his business in the ruins of Mills. Sira runs towards him and states there will be a reception tomorrow where she will receive her reward. Since the princess is free, Momori asks for a private conversation in his room at 8 p.m. Surprised by his straightforwardness, she accepts, but thanks him for his help in retrieving the chalice. Later, before the princess arrives, Momori produces the long-awaited monster enhancement solution. Ceres knocks on the door at the appointed time. Getting straight to the point, Momori reveals he would like to hire the paladin as a bodyguard, though he understands if she prefers to use the chalice money for other things. Mentioning the Dragonite chalice, Momori hopes to remind her of his help to coerce her into accepting his offer. Momori knows this is playing dirty, but he doesn't care. His goal is to find the taboo witch in the land of the golden-eyed monsters, and he wants a talented swordswoman by his side. Ceres reveals it would be convenient for her to travel this path, considering she needs to reach the Duchy of Yamato. However, she still shows indecision, so Momori asks her to take time to think about the proposal without rushing. He then reveals he knows Mist Baluka's real name is Ceres Ashrain, admitting he made her fall asleep in the ruins of Mills through a spell, believing the elf wouldn't sleep if worried about hiding her true identity. Since she hadn't slept for a long time, Momori thought it best to give her this rest. Even without her consent, Sira reveals she uses the power of spirits to conceal her identity, which requires her to stay awake for the effect to remain. The Sacred Watchers were pursuing her because they discovered she was the paladin of Ni. Now that all of them are dead, she thanks Momori once more, revealing her pointed elf ears. Seeing her give up hiding, Momori assumes she trusts him, and she confirms it's true. Momori returns the favor by revealing his true name, but asks the elf to keep it secret. In return, he will not reveal that Mist is actually the Night Princess. They shake hands and agree to embark on this journey together. Momori gives her a bluish magic stone as payment for being his new bodyguard. She is speechless because it's a blue dragon gem, a rare and valuable item born inside legendary blue-eyed dragons, worth more than the Dragon Eye Chalice. Sira doesn't understand how Momori can give her something so valuable. Despite her reaction, Momori insists the gem belongs to her, and she can do with it as she pleases. Sira decides to keep her payment, giving up the argument. Memori requests to continue being called Hattie Skull and proceeds to call her Mist. Since the subject is brought up, Sira notes that her travel companion still knows very little about her, so she plans to share more about herself. However, Memori doesn't wish to investigate the princess's past. He only cares about having a valuable bodyguard by his side on this journey. Sira comments on the kindness of her employer, appreciating his respect for her privacy. He responds that he is indeed a cool guy. After the meeting, while taking a bath, the Night Princess reflects that she should have purified herself before meeting with Lord Takamamori. When he said he didn't want to know about her past, she trusted him just as he believed in her. At dawn, they meet at a tavern for breakfast. Two men at another table offend the woman by implying that a mercenary has already ensnared her, commenting that she was seen leaving the room of the guy sitting next to her. Although involved in the conversation, Memori asks the paladin not to mind their talk. She responds that Lord Hattie is quite mature about it. To distract her, he asks if Cirrus has ever heard of forbidden magic. As soon as she confirms, Memori notices that she always touches her chest while talking. Cirrus explains that these magics are ancient spells prohibited by the goddess via decree. Hearing this, Memori imagines that Vicious forbids these spells precisely because they are dangerous to her. After breakfast, the elf informs him that the reception is scheduled for now, so she leaves and says she should return by early afternoon. Under the pseudonym of Hattie Skull, the hero abandoned by the goddess of this world follows his path alone until Cirrus returns. After spending these days in the princess's presence, Memori finally has time to focus on his work, such as improving Pigumaro. At the reception, Ashrain listens to Cred Hercley, Marquis of Mills, thanking all the guests for their presence and announcing that he has brought a wizard specializing in breaking illusions to prove the authenticity of the Dragon Eye Chalice. Upon entering the hall, the sorcerer has a frightening appearance, and Sira swallows hard when faced with that cold and eccentric expression. Meanwhile, Memori keeps an eye on the time as he waits for his bodyguard's return. Back at Alien Castle, the headquarters of the heroes of this world, Ayaka asks if Sakura is okay. The goddess Vicious assures her that she will reattach her hand through healing, but reminds her that she can't do this for just anyone. Sakura belongs to rank B, and that's the only reason she will have this privilege. Vicious then asks if Ayaka will join Kurihara's group, and Ayaka doesn't think she would get along with that guy. But that's precisely why Vicious brought it up. According to her, Ayaka is disturbing the harmony of Class 2C with her selfishness. Ayaka desperately tries to defend herself from this accusation, so Vicious asks her to calm down, suggesting it might have just been an unfounded rumor by some classmates. With that said, the goddess starts crying and blaming herself. Ayaka insists on asking for forgiveness, but reiterates that it's not a good idea to make her join Kurihara. Vicious implies that this decision is the same as turning her back on someone who needs saving. The human argues that she is fulfilling her duty as a class heroine in her own way. Vicious then hands over all the students who didn't pass the test to Ayaka, meaning she will be responsible for training them all. If Ayaka refuses, Vicious claims she will have no alternative but to eliminate everyone, as she received a royal decree to strictly follow aliens' rules. With no way out, the heroine accepts the proposal, and as soon as she leaves, Vicious finally expresses all her hatred for the brat. Keeping an eye on the clock, Memori starts to think something might have happened to Cirrus, so he asks Pigumaro's opinion. If the slime screams twice, he thinks the elf abandoned them. If it screams only once, he thinks otherwise. When Pigumaro gives just one scream, Memori agrees they are on the same page and trusts that Cirrus didn't leave since she has no reason to do so. Amidst this, Memori hears people on the street saying that the woman who found the chalice is the fugitive princess, and that she escaped to the dark forest while being pursued by the Black Dragon Knights. The man's words prove true as Ashrain rushes into the forest, with mounted men on winged beasts chasing her. After enchanting her sword, she takes down the first opponent. The second falls before the elf's blade. Even with her illusion broken, significantly affecting her spiritual energy, Ashrain kills the third opponent. Sira then confronts Gizun, vice captain of the squad led by Sir Orban of the Five Dragons. Unable to use her spirit garment, the elf must manage with the available spirits. Gizun boasts that Orban's team is under secret orders and wants Ashrain dead. However, before killing her, he intends to show her what it's like to be with a man. At that moment, arriving just in time, Memori paralyzes and poisons Gizun, then puts him to sleep to prevent him from overhearing anything. He discovers that he will also be pursued if he continues to stay with Sira. So the elf wishes to break the agreement they made. Instead of fleeing, Memori gives all his blue dragon gems to the princess, so she won't be without resources. Lastly, he asks Sira to take off her clothes right there, leaving the girl speechless. Toka explains that the people of Mills saw her in the outfit, and he apologizes for the misunderstanding. Ceres feels embarrassed for assuming he had lewd intentions, and reminds him they haven't confirmed if their agreement still stands. Toka responds with a proposal. The Witch of Taboo could shelter her since no one has ever found the witch's location, and since he's heading to the land of the golden-eyed monsters, their agreement should still be valid as their destinations align. Ceres asks why he's willing to go to such lengths for her, and Toka reveals that she reminds him of someone not in looks or personality, but in aura. He explains that abandoning her would feel like abandoning his aunt, which makes Ceres realize how kind he is. The poison dragon dies, and Toka notices it wasn't enough for him to level up. He then unparalyzes Gizun's mouth and offers to show him mercy if he answers correctly. Gizun only says the Black Dragon Knights won't let Toka get away with this. But Toka, who has no intention of letting Gizun go, plans to end his suffering by removing the poison's non-lethal setting. Ceres asks Gizun who wants her dead, and Gizun is amused by the question, curious about her reaction when she learns the truth. Before he can answer, a lance from the sky kills him. Toka notices Dragoon Knights in the air and recognizes one with white hair and red eyes as Sivit Gartland, the strongest knight of humanity. Meanwhile, the Emperor of the Holy Empire of Nid dreams about Sivit, asking him to hand over Ceres, and wakes up terrified. Back in the forest, the Dragoon Knights land, and Ceres notices 5 of them with Sivit, but sees one is missing. Sivit tells Orban he sealed Gizun's lips, and Orban says there was no need to kill him. Sivit advises him not to get carried away with side gigs, thinking the Holy Emperor Ortola must have ordered this. Ortola, still terrified, thinks that while Ceres made him feel youthful again, the thought of another man defiling her is unbearable. He vows to do whatever it takes to make her die and vanish from the world. In the forest, Ceres is shocked that the emperor she served wants her dead. Sivit explains to Orban that he killed Gizun because he would have been a nuisance, though he would have spared him if he dodged the attack. Toka knows Gizun couldn't have dodged even if he wasn't paralyzed. Schweitz asks how they should handle Ceres, revealing that their king left the decision up to them. He suggests passing her around their subordinates as a reward before killing her, but Orban disagrees, saying it could cause problems since Ortola wants her corpse returned with her purity intact. Ceres dismisses their conversation as nonsense, refusing to believe her emperor wants her dead, but Orban tells her Ortola can't die in peace as long as she's alive. Devastated, Ceres hears Sivit offer her the chance to live if she defeats him in a duel. Matama thinks it will be interesting to watch since Ceres' spirit regalia is renowned. Sivit, intrigued by Toka, becomes more interested in him than Ceres. He asks Toka who he is, and Toka, aware of the danger, carefully considers his response. Toka realizes Sivit and his knights are out of his range and knows Sivit is even more dangerous than the Soul Eater. Despite the tight situation, Toka grins, explaining that situations like this excite him, and casually asks Sivit for a talk. Sivit asks his name, and when Toka gives his alias, Sivit sees through it, sensing there's a reason for the concealment. Schweitz questions why Seivet is bothering with Toka, and Seivet explains that it's unusual for someone not to be terrified when facing 5 dragoons, instead waiting for an opportunity to attack. Seivet notes that Toka understands a single wrong move could kill him, yet still seeks to talk, indicating he's not a simple man. Toka recognizes Seivet's intelligence and carefully plans his next move. He asks if Seivet is searching for a worthy opponent, and after confirming, Toka remarks that there are plenty of superhuman opponents in the world, mentioning the goddess of Alien. Seivet agrees but notes that his country, Bacchus, and the kingdom of Alien have close ties. He has high hopes for the heroes summoned by the goddess, believing their blessings will make them worthy foes, and he awaits that day. Toka realizes Seivet's sole desire is to find a worthy opponent. Seivet then tells Ceres he has lost interest in her and plans to deliver her severed head to the Princess of Nai, shocking Ceres. Seivet tells Toka not to be so righteous, pointing out that Ceres is the reason Bacchus changed its stance and invaded Nai. This revelation surprises Ceres, and Orban explains that Bacchus annihilated Nai because the goddess demanded Ceres be handed over. But the Holy Emperor refused. While they talk, Toka formulates a plan for his survival. He asks Seivet if he's seeking a foe who can threaten his life. Seivet confirms this, and Toka boldly declares that he will become that foe. Surprised, Seivet listens as Toka reveals that he's a hero summoned by the goddess, and then shares his real name. This revelation shocks everyone, including Ceres, and piques Seivet's interest. He wonders why Toka is in such a place, and Toka realizes he can't lie since Seivet will see through him. Toka explains that he holds a unique position, even among the heroes, which is why he's acting independently. Seivet, impressed, asks why Toka is acting independently, and Toka claims that because of his exceptional abilities, he's been granted the freedom to act on his own. Seivet, surprised that even the goddess recognizes Toka's talents, asks what Toka wants from him. Toka requests to be spared for now, promising that he will grow stronger and eventually kill Seivet. He even states that he will trample the goddess herself. When Seivet asks how Toka plans to become stronger, Toka mentions that he's heading to the land of the golden-eyed monsters, following a different path from the other heroes, with the goddess's permission. Seivet realizes Toka is implying he won't just disappear, and is likely planning to return for revenge. Seivet agrees to spare him so they can fight to the death one day and tells him to leave. He adds that they'll leave after dealing with Ceres, but Toka objects, explaining that he needs Ceres to safely navigate the land of the golden-eyed monsters. Seivet is surprised that Toka plans to take her without the goddess's approval, but Toka insists it doesn't matter as he intends to use her to grow stronger. Seivet likes the sound of this, and decides to spare both of them, surprising the other dragoons. Seivet tells the others they can always kill Ceres later, but Orban worries that Toka might disappear. Seivet ignores him, warning him to stay quiet if he wants to live, and Orban, terrified, obeys. Seivet then instructs Schweitz to inform the last of the 5 dragoons of this development. As they try to leave the forest, Toka paralyzes them as soon as they turn their backs. The dragons and knights collapse, and Toka states he has no intention of dragging things out, explaining that this is a tale of revenge, knowing the dragon knights will only be a future liability. He decides to eliminate them now. Seivet, struggling to move, asks Toka what he has done to them. Toka responds that he intends to finish them off and poisons them lethally. Seivet tries to fight back, and Toka is astonished that he's the first to move so much under the effects of his paralysis, even more so than the Soul Eater. As Seivet attempts to attack Toka, his body fails him, leaving Toka amazed and thinking he needs to see Seivet die with his own eyes. He also knows he must be prepared for anything. Toka then starts linking himself with Piggy Maru, and after Matama dies, her remaining life energy turns into a signal flare, notifying the others of their whereabouts. The other dragon knights arrive, and Toka tells Ceres he'll stay with Piggy Maru, and that she can flee if she wants. She chooses to stay, as she's supposed to be his bodyguard. The Dragon Knights are shocked to see the 5 dragoons in such bad shape, especially Seivet. Seivet warns them to attack from a distance and not to get too close. Toka completes his link with Piggy Maru, explaining that this ability has 2 drawbacks: the time it takes to enter the state and the high mana consumption. He mentions that the power from the monster-enhancing solution is meant for short combat, and then sends Piggy Maru's various slimy arms at the flying Dragon Knights, paralyzing and poisoning them. He explains that Piggy Maru's arms extend his range when linked together, and then makes the remaining dragoons fall asleep. This levels up his sleep skill to level 3, and he also unlocks the ability to induce berserk, darkness, and freeze effects. Toka tests these abilities on the 3 dragoons, finding that berserk induces violent urges, which he plans to use in combination with paralyze to kill foes faster. He discovers that darkness blinds enemies and feels no remorse for torturing them, considering they intended to do shameful things to Ceres. The 2 dragoons die after his experiments, and Toka gains levels as the dragons he poisoned die. However, Toka is surprised to see that Seivet is still alive, and Seivet asks who he is. Toka simply replies that he's an Avenger, and Seivet dies shortly afterward. Later, Toka tells Ceres she can cover her tracks now, and she thanks him. She notices that Toka has a gentle expression, and he explains it's because he's thinking of someone gentle. Ceres then informs Toka about the last of the 5 dragoons, also known as the Hero Slayer. Toka recalls that the size of the dragons the 5 dragoons rode was different from the rest. Ceres confirms this, and Toka tells her there's no need to worry, as he already crushed that guy before meeting her. She's surprised he defeated the Hero Slayer so easily. Elsewhere, Ayaka checks her stats, noticing she still hasn't awakened her unique skill. The other heroes are with her, waiting for the goddess. Instead, Nyantan Kikipat, a follower of the goddess, arrives and informs them that she will be training them for now, as the goddess is busy. Shogo, unhappy about being bossed around by someone smaller than him, challenges her to a fight, but she defeats him in the blink of an eye. She hopes this dispels any doubts they have about her, and tells them they will soon enter the next stage of their training after returning to the capital. Back in the forest, Toka tells Ceres everything that has happened to him since arriving in this world, explaining that he will use his power to trample any obstacle in his path to revenge. Ceres, who now has her own grudge against the goddess after learning the truth of her nation's destruction, offers her strength in the name of his revenge. Toka warns her that this is a selfish quest with no value, but she insists on helping him since he saved her. He agrees to rely on her, promising to return the favor one day. The scene then shifts to Nyantan meeting the goddess. Vicious believes she was right to have Nyantan watch over the heroes, as she is strong, wise, and loyal. Nyantan then licks the goddess's feet to prove her loyalty, and the goddess thinks the day when the heroes clash with the great demon empire might be closer than expected.
As evening settles outside the ruins of Discard, soldiers from the kingdom inspect a crystal. The commander notes that it should have turned silvery. Anyone could have survived those ruins, especially at an open-air market. The lone survivor of the ruins of Discard picks up a Lord of the Flies mask from a market stall, unaware of its true significance. The vendor explains that this lord transformed an island of monsters into his fortress and defended it against all invaders. His mastery over demons was so great that he was eventually exiled by the very source of evil. Although his army ultimately perished, the legend of the Lord of the Flies' downfall remains popular. Back in his room with the mask in hand, Maimori reflects on how he isn't much of a hero at the moment. He puts on the mask in front of a mirror and feels more like a demon, better suited to his role. Gazing at his reflection, he vows to defeat Vicious, believing that the resolve of a man who has sold his soul should never be underestimated. To inquire if anyone has found any trace of the former captain of Rowan mentions finding blood traces and pieces of clothing belonging to the wanted individual, suggesting she may be gravely injured. Speaking of her, the king of Ulza points out that the Holy Emperor Tola passed away last night and rumors say he lost his mind just before he died. Vicious redirects the conversation, emphasizing that the 5 dragons were their best hope against the Great Demon Empire, and their loss is a significant blow to the Holy Alliance. Because of this, it's clear that the heroes from another world will play an even more critical role in the upcoming war. One of the attendees sarcastically agrees, adding that whenever evil arises, a lion always seems to win. This speaker is Falcon Datsun, the Mad Emperor of Myra. He suggests that whenever the source of evil emerges, all nations are forced to rely on lion to solve the problem. Noticing the insinuation, Vicious responds that it's not her fault if everyone in this world is hindered by the essence of the Demon King, leaving them incapable of fully harnessing it. Falcon then mentions the legend of the Godslayer, just to provoke the goddess. Finally, Sigmas asks if anyone believes Ceres Ashrain was responsible for the deaths of the 5 dragons. A Magnar soldier informs his king that someone in Ulza has claimed responsibility, a group known for using Ashen curses. Meanwhile, in the bloodthirsty warrior city of Monroe, Ceres and Maimori approach the land of the golden-eyed monsters, located to the north of the city. Monroe is notorious for its bloody coliseum and arena, where slaves and mercenaries kill each other for money and fame. Ceres explains that the Duke and the Mercenary Guild manage the place, which has become the primary source of entertainment for the masses. But the travelers soon find an inn, and Ceres suggests they share a room. Maimori reminds her that he's a man, but the elf doesn't seem to mind, though she blushes while admitting it. Later at a tavern, Maimori overhears a group of men discussing how Ceres Ashrain faced the 5 dragons and apparently died in the process. Hearing her name, Ceres chokes on her food as the men continue talking, mentioning that the Ashen killed the 5 dragons shortly afterward. With their powerful curses, they were able to defeat such a feared group. Ceres remarks that she's been hearing many rumors about them lately, and notes that they are worshippers of Miwaji, the god of curses. As they speak, 4 men in red cloaks enter the tavern, causing a hushed silence among the patrons as they observe the Ashen Guardians, who call themselves the Cursed Soldiers. The 4 men demand a table be cleared for them and quickly order drinks, declaring themselves the saviors of Ulza. Despite the fear surrounding them, Maimori doesn't see these men as a threat. He imagines they might have claimed responsibility for the crime against the Black Dragon Knights to gain some advance or fame. 2 patrons even comment among themselves that anyone could have killed the 5 dragons, given that Ashen curses can be almost anything, making it easy for them to take credit for any crime. They also discuss the Witch of Taboos, revealing that she's a dark elf who hasn't been seen in over a decade, though someone from the capital claims to have met her. Intrigued, Maimori approaches the neighboring table and asks for more information about the witch. The men, initially displeased with his sudden approach, warm up when the young man offers them a drink and some food. They reveal that the person claiming to have known the Witch of Taboos is Monroe's most formidable bloodthirsty warrior, who can likely be found at the Colosseum. However, Maimori is in luck, as the warrior has just entered the tavern. Her name is Eve Speed, the leopard, and she sits quietly in a corner, eating her meal. Maimori approaches Eve and offers to order something from the menu, introducing himself as a mercenary named Hattie Skyowl. He admits he's always been curious to know more about the legendary warrior. Eve, with little patience, tells him to get straight to the point. She knows he didn't come all this way just to hear about her victories in the Colosseum. Embarrassed, Maimori compliments her sharp intuition and asks where the Witch of Taboos. Eve informs him that he's been deceived. Though she ventured into the land of the golden-eyed monsters, where the witch resides, she has never actually met her. Hearing this, Syrah's ears suddenly perk up. Eve then asks why the mercenary is so interested in the witch. Maimori explains that he hopes to become a scholar someday and wants to research such an intriguing figure. Eve warns him that the witch's domain is a place you might enter but never leave alive. Though it may seem rude, she feels obligated to inform Maimori that he wouldn't last 3 days there. When Maimori sincerely thanks her for the warning, Eve comments that he seems like a good person and that he should value his life more, even if that advice sounds hollow coming from a Bloodsport warrior. With that, she leaves the tavern. As they exit, Syrah mentions that Eve was lying about not knowing the witch, which Maimori already suspected. At the same time, Maimori remembers that he didn't bring food for Peijimaru, so he decides to use his magical pouch after a long time. With it, he feeds the slime and the elf a grilled cheese sandwich, a food from his original world. The other two love it when they try it. Syra admires the transparent pouch and notices that it has letters inscribed on it. Momori, seeing the elf's hair blowing in the wind, comments that things from another world seem more interesting. He then recalls that it's time to come up with a plan to reach the Witch of Taboos. Syra suggests they could pay for Evespeed's freedom, so she can reveal the witch's whereabouts, since warriors are usually bound to servitude. Meanwhile, the leopard is at the door of a small dark elf, promising to get the child out of there. Back in the inn's room, Syra Ashrain summons her spirit attire and practices her techniques. Momori reflects that Civet Gartland, the strongest human, had good reasons to want to measure his strength against such a talented warrior. Taking advantage of the moment, he asks the elf for some tips on hand-to-hand combat, since he relies too much on his ranged abilities and might one day need to engage in close combat. Remembering her days as a captain, Ashrain feels nostalgic as she announces a blocking lesson. She starts by telling him to attack her, then defends against Momori's punch by immobilizing his arm. However, as her sweaty chest brushes against him, she apologizes if she crossed a line. Momori didn't think anything of it, so they continue their training, which involves direct physical contact. After the practice, Syra, while washing clothes, takes a deep sniff of the guy's sweaty tunic. She reflects that part of him is merging with her. After doing so, she begins to judge herself as a pervert until Momori suddenly appears behind her, startling the elf. The first thing she wants to know is how long he's been standing there, but he prefers not to answer and just looks sheepish. He explains that he missed his clothes and was looking for them. The former captain explains that she decided to wash his clothes along with hers. Momori observes her and thinks that this is what a truly kind person looks like. As he picks up his Lord of the Flies mask, he reflects that the elf is doing everything she can to become his sword, suppressing her own emotions to fulfill that role. For that reason, he feels he should be grateful. At that moment, Syra wakes up and asks if Momori is okay. He explains that he just can't sleep. In that case, she offers Momori a medicinal herb, which reminds him of an ingredient that could pair well with such a mixture. Soon, the two sit together and try the ingredient with the herbal tea, but the elf ends up giving Momori, but he's too agitated to concentrate on reading. Syra asks if she can help with anything, while Momori looks at her and feels something strange. So he asks her to sleep before he says what's on his mind. Syra can't hold back and asks if Momori is resistant to seduction. He responds that at the moment, yes, because his priority is revenge. This obsession prevents Momori from focusing on anything else. Once he achieves his goal, he's sure he'll be able to care about other things. But until then, he feels cursed by this intense desire to settle the score. Struggling not to pounce on him, Syra kneels and promises to do everything she can to help Momori rid himself of this curse. The next day, in front of the bloody Colosseum, Syra gathers information about Eve's past. Eve was a slave to a lord, but that man sold her to the Colosseum. Since leopards are uncommon, she quickly became successful and has been undefeated. Eve has had enough money to buy her freedom for 2 years, but she continues to fight to buy the freedom of a small dark elf. The leopard's next fight will be her last, where she'll have earned enough to do so. The problem is that most previous champions died in their final match. Syra suspects foul play and believes that the Duke, who runs the Colosseum, puts the champions at a disadvantage. Momori thinks he can lend a hand if that's the case. However, he doesn't want to wait until the day of the fight, so he arranges a meeting with Evespeed. The leopard assumes it's another question about the Witch of Taboos, so she quickly says she doesn't know where the witch is. But Momori accuses her of lying. Syra Ashrain joins the conversation and confirms Momori's claim. Eve, suspicious of these two hooded strangers accusing her, places her hand on her sword and demands they get to the point. Momori reveals that he's there to save her because the Duke plans to ensure her defeat in tomorrow's fight. Eve questions why he would help her, and he explains that he can't allow the death of someone who knows about the Witch of Taboos. He asks if it's possible to take the young elf, whom Eve is trying to save, and escape tonight. Eve sees the mention of the elf as a threat and warns that the human is fate won't be pleasant if he touches the child. Momori stays calm and with Syra explains that they know the situation and have no ill intentions toward little Lise. On the contrary, they know Eve has been fighting for years to free the child. Eve thanks them for the warning about the setup, but insists she cannot flee because she has nowhere to go. If she escapes, Duke Suin will hunt her down, and the Colosseum Guild will put a bounty on her head, attracting mercenaries. If it were just her, it might be different, but she can help leave Liz in danger. Momori suggests they go to where the Witch of Taboos lives, as the witch might shelter them both. But Eve mentions that no one can reach the heart of the monster lands, speaking with the authority of someone who's been there before. Momori realizes she has experience with the monster lands and promises to protect the child with his life. He advises Eve to rescue Liz and join him in heading toward the monster lands, believing they can overcome the obstacles together. Eve comments that the swordswoman with Momori seems trained, unlike him. Sierra is about to speak, but Momori interrupts, claiming to be skilled in magic, even if it doesn't seem like it. He's powerful enough, he says, to defeat a skeleton king with ease. Eve agrees that a skeleton king is formidable, but argues that it is nothing compared to what they'll face in the monster lands. Momori goes further, claiming he killed 5 dragons, but Eve doesn't believe him. So, to prove his abilities, Momori paralyzes her. Eve strains to break free, but Momori warns her to take it easy before she starts bleeding. Eve calls it absurd, and Momori responds that this absurdity is what brought an end to the 5 dragons, including the strongest civic garland. Sarah then reveals herself as the former captain of the Knights of Ni, who was pursued by the Black Dragons. After this, Momori releases Eve from the paralysis, leaving it up to her whether to believe them. She admits that the boy seems powerful but doubts it will be enough to get through the monster lands. She decides to stick to her plan and fight tomorrow to legally win Liz's freedom. After all, she doesn't know them well enough and has a long history with blood sports. Momori asks if Eve truly believes Duke Zuin will keep his word, even if she wins, as he is known to be a dishonest man. Eve acknowledges that Zuin is not a man of integrity, but he has always honored his obligations when she delivered results, so she believes this time will be no different. She chooses to place her faith in the fight tomorrow. Before leaving, Momori questions if she is placing so much faith in the ring just to fool herself into thinking everything will turn out fine. He doesn't expect an answer but wants to leave her with doubt. With that, he turns to leave, mentioning that he will depart from the city early tomorrow, leaving from the bridge near the Great Gate, and invites the gladiator to join him if she changes her mind. On their way back to the inn, the pair passed a house where a family had been cursed for challenging Waji, the god of curses. Nearby, a woman in the crowd mentioned that the man of the house died foaming at the mouth and clawing at his throat. Meanwhile, the Ashen followers of Waji boasted about killing the 5 dragons and declared themselves the saviors of Ulza. As they continued walking, Sarah Ashrain expressed her disgust for the group until they saw a girl being harassed by a man up ahead. Momori used his power to drive one of the cult members insane, causing him to attack his companions. He repeated this with the remaining opponents, turning the street into a battleground. In the chaos, the girl escaped, and the pair resumed their journey. In the early hours of the next day, 4 hours before Momori and Ashrain were set to leave Monroy, the elf asked if Eve had any chance of freeing Liz. But the boy assured her there wasn't it, given the Dukas' nature. Worried that Eve might not change her mind, they decided to act. Unable to sleep, Eve speed tossed and turned in her bed, hoping Zuin would keep his promise to grant Liz freedom. But doubt gnawed at her, so she decided to ensure she would get what sure she lied. She stealthily approached the Dukas' door and listened to his conversation with a subordinate. Zuin remarked that Eve was his most beloved warrior, and that a paralyzing agent should be given to her before the fight, as per tradition. After her rival claimed victory, they would skin Eve to gain public respect and sell her as the Leopard Slayer. As for the young dark elf from the White Leg Tavern, Zuin planned to use her for his selfish purposes and sell her when he tired of her. He felt no sympathy for inferior beings. Enraged by the truth, Eve realized that escaping was the only way to save Liz. On her way back to her quarters, she was approached by Mwaji, the leader of the Ashen, who was excited about the upcoming fight. After expressing his enthusiasm, he was called away by other members, giving Eve the chance to leave. Eve went to the location Momori had described and promised to join them in the monster land, but with a few conditions. Momori understood and announced it was time to rescue Liz. Meanwhile, at the White Leg Tavern, Lista's mistress berated her for being slow to clean a table, claiming it was a trait of her race. A man noticed the girl and commented on her looks, but the mistress told him to keep his hands off, as someone important was already watching her. The mistress slapped the elf repeatedly, knocking her to the ground. Liz remembered when Eve gave her a gift and asked her to be strong because they both needed to fight for their freedom. This memory filled Liz with courage, and she struggled to her feet, swallowing her tears. The mistress continued to harass Liz, threatening her if she resisted, until Eve burst into the tavern, forcefully opening the door and knocking the woman down. The mistress begged for her life, claiming the Duke forced her to act that way, and promised not to say anything about their escape. Eve spared the woman on the condition that she spread the story that Eve Speed had disappeared, heading south. The mistress agreed and even apologized to Liz for how she had treated her. The little elf thanked the woman for everything she had done to her. At that moment, Momori entered with the Lord of the Flies mask, making a loud entrance. Seeing Liz startled, he apologized and suggested that Eve and Liz hurry ahead, as he had a few things to take care of before joining them. Once the two had left, Momori confronted the mistress, saying she might have fooled Eve and Liz, but her act wouldn't work on him. The woman dropped her mask and assured him that the Duke would teach the boy and the filthy beast in a lesson. Remembering how Liz had been frightened by the noise he made upon entering, Momori blamed the mistress, saying Liz was traumatized by the loud noises and intense shouting the woman often provoked. Because of the suffering she caused Liz, Momori paralyzed, darkened, and poisoned the woman, staging the scene to look like a robbery. The mistress cursed him, saying he would go to hell, but Momori, admitting he had crushed dozens of people to achieve his goals, told her he would be waiting for her in hell. Afterward, Momori reunited with the group, and the little elf introduced herself as Lisbeth. Momori took the opportunity to introduce Pijimaru, who had been missing for some time. After earning Eevee's trust, the leopard planned to tell him where the Witch of Taboos lived, but first she wanted to know what he wanted with her. Momori explained that he had a scroll of forbidden magic written in an ancient text that was difficult to decipher and had heard the witch might be able to interpret it. Upon hearing this, Eve believed him, considering that he could have used his abilities to extract information cruelly but chose not to. They continued their journey to the horses. As they mounted, Sarah Ashrain questioned if it was dangerous to go to the monster land, but Momori assured her he would protect the girl no matter what. The elf praised his kindness, but Momori reminded her that his motivation wasn't the bull. Since Eve had been to the region, she could be useful, and Liz, being a dark elf like the witch, might help them make a good impression. But of course, he also agreed that allowing the child to live with a smile rather than tears was better. As they advanced, the group noticed torches moving in the distance. Eve assumed it was the Ashent, led by Mwaji. She apologized for dragging them into the mess and planned to flee, but Momori preferred to set a trap. He quickly tied torches to the horses and spooked them, and Sira saw the first wave of enemies chasing after the animals. However, they were an Ashent, but rather the Dukia's personal army. This meant the second wave was likely Mwaji's subordinates. Momori instructed Eve to take Liz and hide in the forest while he and Sarah followed through with the rest of the plan. The story continues as Mwaji realizes it's a trap. Claiming to have figured everything out, he orders the hidden person to reveal themselves and Sarah steps forward wearing a strange helmet. Mwaji remarks that the mask represents the Fly Swordsman, a subordinate from the legend of the Lord of the Flies. Setting that aside, despite not knowing who the person under the helmet is, he promises to spare the elf's life if she hands over the leopard and the child. Sarah questions what will happen if she refuses the offer, to which the man warns that he will make her suffer through his curses to the point she will regret ever being born. With all his archers pointing their arrows at the princess, the self-proclaimed god assures her that not even the 5 dragons, the most powerful beings among humankind, survive the Ashen's whims. Hearing this, Ashrain asks for a promise that the sorcerer will keep Eve's speed and Lisbeth safe. Of course, Mwaji gives his word, and the elf instructs the members of the cult to follow her. At that moment, the archers lower their bows and begin following the knight, but the leader suddenly orders everyone to stop. After all, he doesn't believe the stranger's only intention is to hand over the hostage, especially after she asked for all the Ashen to come along when only a few would have been enough. It seems the masked woman plans to lead all the members into the forest. With that, the sect leader orders his subordinates to step back and prepare for an attack. Cirrus grips the hilt of her sword and admits she thought the Ashen would kill her with one of his curses, but he has a secret for her. The Ashen soldiers are successors of the Assassin's Guild. Once a hero declared the guild wicked and wiped it out, but the group now known as the Ashen inherited the guild's line of work, becoming users of curses. At the end of that sentence, a drop of poison falls from the tip of an Ashen arrow. Sarah's Ashrain notices the substance, and Mwaji explains that it's a poison so advanced, it can only be synthesized through special techniques passed down among the few surviving members of the Assassin's Guild. Faced with this, Sirius reflects that the Ashen kill with this poison that leaves no trace, and this must be the truth behind their Mwaji continues his false narrative, claiming that the downfall of the Black Dragon Knights landed in his lap, which provided the perfect opportunity for the Ashen to fuel popular belief in their plagues. After all, the trick is that no one can prove these curses truly exist, and being able to play in that shadow is what has given the Ashen legends so much power in recent times. Ashrain wants to know the organization's ultimate goal, and the leader reveals that they aim to use Duke Xuan to seize a central role in the nation. By the way, Mwaji asks where the warrior's allies are, but Cirrus insists that only Eve and Lisbeth are with her. Mwaji, of course, doesn't believe for a second that this is true, as there's no way this outsider would dare face the defunct Assassin's Guild alone. Thus, Ashrain promises to explain the situation more clearly, then removes her mask, revealing her elf ears, and claiming to be the true executor of the 5 dragons. Mwaji is stunned upon recognizing the features of Shahraz Ashrain, but everything starts to make sense to him. Even so, he doubts that the former captain of the Knights of Ni was responsible for the dragon's deaths simply because he doesn't believe she has the capability for such a feat. As he states, this Mwaji snaps his fingers, calling Belger forward, the man who was Eve Speed's final opponent in the Colosseum. Standing a little behind, with a crossbow aimed at the princess, is his older brother Varigan. These are the two most skilled members of the Ashen. Ironically, these men had a younger brother named Zerosh Feinbard, known as the Fang, one of the Four Saints, watchers who was killed while pursuing the Paladin of Nii. Finally, Mawagi assumes that these Asciant are eager for a potential reckoning with Shahraz Ashrain, but the story doesn't end there. Aside from the enemies Cyrus can see before her, the Asciant leader assures her that other subordinates are scattered around practicing the art of ambush that any decent assassin should master. Speaking of decency, the leader of the defunct guild couldn't help but notice the elf has a beautiful face, and perhaps he'll need some time to bestow his personal blessing on her and reshape Shahraz into a proper devotee of the god of curses. Without wasting any more time, the man orders the elf to kneel, which she obeys. Once she does, Mawagi guarantees her the honor of bearing his child. At that moment, Ashrain closes her eyes, awaiting Takamamori to play his part. Wearing his Lord of the Flies mask, the exiled hero appears with his charge acceleration and promises to show the Ashen to curse they don't know paralysis. With all the servants immobilized, Mwaji demands to know where his rear guard is, and Mamori informs him that he already dealt with those 15 individuals while their leader couldn't stop talking. With that, the boy poisons the enemy leader and his subordinates, knowing the rival would be more focused on uncovering some plot by Eve Speed Mamori, anticipated that Miyagi would fall for the intentionally broken branch and avoid entering the forest fearing a trap. So he used Shahraz as bait for the Ashen to believe they were in control, letting their guard down while waiting for the perfect moment to strike. By this point in the story, all the enemies had already lost their minds, so Mamori asks the elf to return and update Eve on the situation. He then moves back through the forest and finds a strategic point suggesting the Duke's troops are returning because his trap isn't over yet and Zuin's return is part of the plan. The boy asked Pigimaru to reconnect with him, but the little slime seemed sad. Seeing this, Mamori apologized, realizing he hadn't considered the cost Pigimaru had to pay. Just then, Eve returned, offering help, while Sears took charge of caring for Lies. The leopard used her senses to estimate the number of enemies, positioning herself among the fallen Ashen soldiers to draw attention. When the pugilists spotted them, they rushed forward without hesitation. Mamori quickly paralyzed and poisoned most of them. Soon, Duke Swan himself arrived with a subordinate, threatening to harm Lisbeth. Repulsed by his words, Mamori immobilized the Duke, but he reached his limit for controlling targets, so he cast Darken on Zuan's companion. As a result, the enemy's vision vanished, and Eve swiftly struck him down. The knights who freed themselves from paralysis became targets of the Darken spell, and Eve killed each one as soon as they were cursed. Realizing they had no chance, the remaining soldiers retreated, only to be pursued by the opposing group. Mamori continued controlling his limit of targets as he moved across the battlefield, inflicting status ailments while Eve and Cirrus covered his rear. Enraged, the Duke ordered his men to finish off Mamori, but by that time, nearly all the enemies had been eliminated by Mori and his allies or were lost in confusion. During all this, Eve was ruthlessly slaughtering her opponents. When only Zuan remained, the Duke vowed revenge, but Mamori, tired of his empty threats, immobilized him. Eve, sword in hand, approached the terrified Duke. She told him that she might have forgiven him if he had only deceived her, but by involving Lies, he had lost all dignity. Without mercy, she cut him down. After the battle, Sears apologized for acting without orders while defending their leader's rear. In response, Mamori appointed her vice captain of the mercenary group, giving her authority to act on her own in such situations. Looking around, Mamori noticed no enemies were left alive. He froze their bodies and shattered them to leave no trace behind. Hours later, Jain Rowan was informed that the Ashen had vanished, with only the bodies of the Duke and his personal army remaining. His plan to use the Ashen as pawns had collapsed, and he dreaded having to explain this failure to the goddess Vicious. He ordered the Ashen to be found immediately. Meanwhile, the mercenary group sheltered from the rain in a nearby cave. As Syrah bathed, Lies asked if she would ever grow up to be like the princess. She shared that a bar owner once told her that if she didn't grow, she wouldn't be seen as a proper woman. Syrah reassured her that those words meant nothing and advised Lies to only trust the people who mattered to her. In response, the dark elf said she would hold on to Shahraz Ashrain's words, seeing her as an older sister. Liz then lay down to sleep beside Eve, and Syrah suggested Mamori rest while she stood guard. Mamori admitted he wouldn't be able to sleep, so Syrah jokingly offered him her lap to see if it would help. Mamori, in turn, joked that she could use his lap as a pillow if she ever needed it. But Syrah took him seriously and lay down on him. Startled, Mamori apologized for the misunderstanding, and she got up. Letting it go, Mamori admitted he was curious about touching the elf's ears, but when he did, Syrah asked him to stop. She then inquired if Mamori saw Eve as a mere animal, given how gently he treated her. Momori explained that he saw the leopard more like his uncle, as if the two shared the same heart. After all, his uncle and aunt were the only reason Momori wanted to return to his world. Lies, he added, was like him in some ways, having suffered in terrible environments. The difference was that he had become hostile and wandered this world seeking revenge. If Sears wanted to leave him because of that, so be it. Ashrain had her own hatred for the goddess of Alien and intended to stay. With that in mind, Momori promised to do everything he could for Sears. The elf went to sleep, leaving Momori to guard. Speaking of vicious, one of her most loyal followers, Nyantan Kikapat, was secretly training Ayaka Sag with the sword. Nyantan had agreed to train Ayaka because she reminded her of her little sister, and she didn't want the girl to become a victim in this kill or be killed world. At dawn, Sierra proposed naming the mercenary group, suggesting warriors of the Lord of the Flies. Eve and Lies agreed, followed by Pijimaru, and Momori accepted the idea. By late afternoon, they reached the land of monsters and saw a corrupted tree. According to Eve, it was once a sacred tree. She then asked Momori for some mana and opened a map revealing their location and that of the Witch of Taboos. That night, they camped again, and Momori's desire for vengeance burned stronger with each passing day. Though the land was dangerous, it also offered opportunities for him to grow stronger. The next day, Vicious congratulated all the hero groups on their progress. To raise the level of their training, she announced a new mission: she would bring in famous figures from all nations to train the heroes. With this, her expectations grew as she waited to see how the heroes of Allen would fare against the Demon Lord's army. Later, she informed Knighton of her plans to lead the heroes to the land of the golden-eyed monsters. Meanwhile, Momori introduced white chocolate to his friends, winning their hearts even more. Later, we see Lisbeth carrying a large bag, and Ceres offers to help, but Lisbeth assures her she's fine. She explains that if she carries more, the others can carry less, increasing their chances of survival. She asks Ceres to let her handle it, and Eve supports Lisbeth's decision, with Toka agreeing since she's a member of their mercenary band. Toka encourages Lisbeth to speak up if she gets tired and assigns Piggy Maru to watch the surroundings. As they move forward, they feel confident they have enough food and water for now. Suddenly, they sense a monster nearby. Eve faces off with the monster while the others hide. Toka observes that it resembles the creatures he encountered in the ruins of Disposal, except for its seaweed-like head. During the fight, Eve engages the monster and Toka, while hidden, uses Paralyze on it. Then he steps out, poisons the monster, and puts it to sleep. He commends Eve for her efforts, and she asks if things went according to plan. Toka confirms they did, noting that his skills work on the creatures in the land of monsters, just as they do elsewhere. The monster soon dies, and Toka reflects that while they look like those from the ruins of Disposal, they are actually weaker. Disappointed, he concludes that the monsters here won't pose much of a challenge. He then searches the creature for materials, and Ceres asks what he's doing. He tells her he read about this monster in the Book of Forbidden Arts, which Ceres finds and confirms contains ingredients for forbidden items, similar to the voice-altering stone in the Lord of Flies mask. Toka notices Ceres' interest in the book and offers to give it to her, which she accepts with gratitude. Toka thinks he needs to be cautious around her, as she can easily see through him. After collecting the materials, he declares it's time to begin their conquest of the land of monsters, and they proceed to cross a river. Toka crosses without difficulty, and next, it's Lisbeth's turn. Eve offers to help her, but Lisbeth insists on managing by herself. She jumps across the stones, slipping on one, but Piggy Maru catches her before she falls. Eve is relieved that Toka had a safety plan in place, and Toka explains that he wants to support Lisbeth whenever she's determined to achieve something, but he admits it's also because it benefits him. Lisbeth eventually makes it across and asks if they were talking about her. Eve quickly covers, claiming they were discussing how rare children of high elves and humans are, and wondering what Toka and Ceres' children might look like. Ceres, mid-crossing, gets distracted by this and falls into the river, soaked. She apologizes for letting her guard down. Eve is surprised that even Ceres can get distracted, and Toka is unsure if Eve is sharp or just naive. Toka notices that Ceres is cold and drapes his coat over her, teasing that it probably smells like him, which Ceres surprisingly enjoys. As they move on, Toka realizes she was joking too. Suddenly, Eve senses something approaching. Ceres stays with Lisbeth, and Toka asks Eve if she recognizes the monsters. Eve admits she can't defeat them, recalling these creatures were the reason she and Lisbeth fled the land of monsters. Toka tells her to stay back, hides behind a tree, and prepares for the fight. When the monsters come within range, Toka paralyzes them and uses Berserk to finish them quickly. He levels up afterward, and Eve notices how familiar Toka seems with these monsters. Toka explains they are likely Nazords, and he cuts off part of their paws. Eve asks if he plans to eat it, but Ceres clarifies that it's for enhancing slimes like Piggy Maru, who is grossed out by the thought of eating it. Toka reassures Piggy Maru that it won't taste bad once it's turned into a solution. Suddenly, they sense a brief wave of murderous intent, but it vanishes quickly, leaving them puzzled. They prepare for battle, but Piggy Maru alerts Toka that the murderous intent is coming from his bag. When Toka checks, he discovers that the egg he had found earlier is glowing and hatches into a horse, which immediately grows into an adult size. The group is confused, and even Ceres doesn't recognize the creature. The horse, showing affection, rubs against Toka, who notices an organ on its back. Ceres explains that this organ is used to absorb magic, a feature unique to magical creatures. Toka asks everyone to step back as he pours magic into the horse, suspecting it may grow by absorbing the magic. Using his stats window, he keeps track of how much MP he's consuming. After expending 1,000 magic points, the horse becomes even larger, and Toka realizes its potential for carrying their luggage. The horse begs for more magic, and Toka continues to pour in mana until he's down 10,000 points. The horse transforms into a massive, muscular creature with 8 legs. Impressed, Toka believes they've added a valuable companion to their team. Lisbeth asks what he will name it, and since it has 8 legs, similar to Odin's horse, Toka decides to call it Slay, short for Sleipnir. The creature likes the name, and when Ceres pets it, the horse affectionately licks her. Eve comments that the horse seems to have taken a liking to Ceres. Toka then checks if the horse can revert to its original form, and it does, much to his relief. Next, we see Ayaka's squad reflecting on their weaknesses, but Ayaka understands that they're giving it their all. Then we shift to Asaji's squad, where her team members compliment her as they've been leveling up steadily. Asaji attributes their success to the group's talent and teamwork, stating that they coordinate well to find monsters and fairly share the experience points. She also mentions that even the timid Kabuto has leveled up thanks to this, and Kabuto expresses his gratitude. Shogo then notices Takuto looking uneasy. Takuto admits he dislikes how their trainers keep throwing weak monsters at them to help them gain experience, thinking it's insulting and underestimating their abilities. He decides it's time to prove a point. Meanwhile, the heroes' instructors spot dangerous monsters approaching and decide to handle them on their own. Fearing the heroes might not be able to manage, they ask Nyanten to provide support, which annoys Takuto, who resents being held back. As the Nodzords approach, Nyanten acknowledges their strength and decides she can't leave the kill for the heroes. She swiftly kills one Nodzord, while the others take out the second. When an entire horde of Nodzords heads their way, Takuto refuses to sit idly by and uses his Draconic Buster to eliminate the monsters. Afterward, he demands that the instructors reevaluate their opinion of him, demonstrating his capability. Kabuto, meanwhile, notices that the Takao sisters are absent. We then see the Takao sisters elsewhere, hearing loud noises from the direction of the other heroes. Itsuki suggests returning, as the spies they had discovered killed themselves once exposed. Hijiri speculates that the spies were likely sent by the goddess Vicious and were targeting them. Later, Tuka is seen staring into the distance while camping in the forest. Sears approaches, noting that thanks to Slay, they've made better time than expected. She mentions that they'll soon find the Witch of Taboos and asks what he's looking at. Tuka explains that he saw a strange light in the distance, possibly monsters fighting. Sears realizes he's looking northeast towards a lion where the dreaded goddess resides. The scene shifts to the next morning, and Ceres can't find Toka in camp. Eve reassures her, saying Toka wouldn't leave them. As they step outside, they find Toka surrounded by monster corpses. He explains that he sensed the monsters nearby and took them out. Eve is amazed that he managed to kill a human-faced beast on his own, something she hadn't expected. Toka downplays the difficulty, remarking that it wasn't much compared to what he's used to. He then checks the monsters for usable materials. Eve is still in awe, while Ceres remarks that this is typical of Toka. She credits him for their ability to travel safely through the land of monsters and expresses hope that he isn't carrying too much of the burden on his own. The scene shifts to them standing in front of some towering mountains. They soon discover that even Slay can't climb the steep mountains, so they decide to take a path around them. Toka finds a route along the eastern cliffs and urges them to hurry. Sears suggests that Toka rest, but he insists he's fine. Feeling the humidity in the air, he pushes them to move as far as possible before the rain hits. They proceed along the path but are uneasy about the lack of monsters, suspecting it may be because they're nearing the Witch of Taboos. Toka checks on Lisbeth, asking if she's scared of the land of monsters. She admits that it is frightening but assures him she's okay. Toka hopes she doesn't say something like dying here is better than living in Monroy. Lisbeth agrees that living in Monroy was terrible but says she doesn't expect to die here. She tells Toka that Ceres believes they'll reach their destination safely as long as Toka is with them, and Toka finds himself a little unnerved by the faith both Lisbeth and Ceres have in him. He resolves not to betray their trust. After some time, they reach a cave and Toka believes they're getting closer to the Witch of Taboos. The group is relieved to have made it this far. Eve thanks Toka, but he brushes it off, saying they wouldn't have made it without the map Eve provided. He adds that his assistance wasn't out of goodwill, they simply each had what the other needed. Eve then reveals that she always dreamed of leaving her life of Bloodsport behind to live a peaceful life with Lisbeth, but that dream was taken from her. However, thanks to Toka, she now has a chance to make it a reality. She envisions opening a farm with Lisbeth once this ordeal is over, and that future finally feels within reach. Just then, a monster sneaks up behind Eve, and she swiftly kills it. Despite the kill, Toka senses something amiss and wonders if the monster is truly dead. Eve insists it is, but after paralyzing the creature, Toka realizes it really is lifeless. Still, he can't shake the feeling that something's wrong. Suddenly, the monster lets out a loud howl and Toka fears it might be calling for reinforcements. As the howl fades, Eve wonders what just happened. Toka quickly senses a swarm of monsters converging on them, flooding in from all directions. His classmates also spot the monsters moving through the forest, and Toka isn't sure if he can handle this many enemies.
In the habitat of the giant mouth monster, the deathly scream that echoed through the air acted as bait, luring a massive horde toward them. The group had only a short time before the enemies arrived, so they needed to devise an escape plan. Eve's speed took the lead, volunteering to be the bait to lure the monsters away, while the others would use the distraction to find the witch. Bliss disapproved of the idea, but the leopard reassured her, saying that it was her fault. This had happened, and she needed to fix it. Besides, the feline had incredibly sharp senses and was an expert at navigating this kind of terrain. Mamori understood why Eve wanted to serve as bait, but he made her promise to return alive. Without hesitation, the feline promised, though Teaka disliked the fact that she made such a promise, knowing her chances of survival were slim. First, he explained that speed shouldn't feel responsible for what happened, as the monster she attacked had remained hidden until it was very close, appearing suddenly without warning, which would have startled anyone. Even Cirrus admitted she would have done the same in Eve's place. Mamori also confessed that he should have used his status ability right away, meaning he shared some of the blame. Considering that the leopard shouldn't bear all the guilt, Mamori reminded the group that she was crucial for finding the witch, as she was the only one with the map embedded in her body. Since Eve was someone the witch trusted, this could be a great advantage in negotiations. Afterward, Tawaka separated his voice projection stone from his mask, announcing that he had the best chance of surviving. Thus, Hippogimaru and Slay were assigned the task of luring the horde of monsters. Additionally, only his status condition ability could guarantee a fatal blow against the humanoid beast. Lies thanked him for taking the feline's place, but he replied that it was too early for gratitude. Finally, Cirrus ash rained down as she wished the mercenary good luck, and Tauka left the rest in the elf's hands if he didn't return. With that, he embarked on his mission, leaving the group. Among the students scattered throughout the forest, the instructors did everything they could to manage the situation, but the sheer number of monsters was overwhelming. The more confident students fought the creatures, while Kirihara Tokudo hated how insignificant he felt, seeing himself as just another obstacle for the beasts. Elsewhere in the forest, some students, lacking the skills of the stronger members, fled however they could. Some even exploited others, as when Kobato tried to save Kani from a monster, but ended up overpowered. After being saved, Kani fled, leaving her rescuer to die, ironically thanking her on the way out. Still, Kobato felt relieved that no one had died yet. But as soon as she thought that, she remembered the tragic fate of Taka Mamori and immediately regretted her words. Meanwhile, the discarded hero knew it was time to act. He had ordered the women in the group to hide in a cave they found, and now it was time to execute his plan. He expanded some of the rooms with his mana and, mounted on Pigimaru, set off toward their goal. Channeling mana into his mask, he instructed the slime to signal the start of the battle. The creature projected its power into the mask, making it resonate and attracting the horde. Soon, the sound of monsters pursuing the human could be heard, and he donned his mask, preparing for a high-speed chase. As the pursuit began, Takamimori wasn't sure if he would survive, but he couldn't show any doubt in front of his group. So he charged forward with confidence, throwing himself into the battle. By his side, Pigimaru and Slay remained loyal, determined to protect Kira, Eve, and Lice. The human activated his charge acceleration just as the monsters closed in. Amidst the chaos, Ayaka saw her friends dead in the forest and struggled to maintain her composure. She approached Yasu asking if Haruka and Sakuma, who had died, were part of his group. Yasu coldly responded that high-ranking heroes like him took priority and that the two were too slow to escape, so they were left behind. Distressed, Ayaka asked if he had done nothing when the horde appeared, considering he was a class A hero and should have protected his comrades. Yasu snapped, telling her to shut up and accusing her of acting superior and belittling others. Ayaka defended herself, saying she was only suggesting that he protect others, but Yasu didn't want to hear it. He shouted that he survived because he was strong and the others died because they were weak, as if it were simple math. Ayaka retorted that the strong had a responsibility to protect the weak, but Yasu mocked her, claiming she spoke as if she were one of the strong ones. According to him, Haruka and Sakuma had been the first to look down on Taoka when he was thrown into the ruin of discard and had always bullied Yasu at school. For that reason, he felt no pity for them. At that moment, Kirihara appeared alongside Oyamada, declaring that Yasu was nothing. He explained that while everyone had the potential for greatness, only those who earned it were truly worthy of it. Otherwise, their success would only be temporary. Yasu asked what he meant. Kirihara responded that Yasu was acting like a nobody. Finally, he stated that Yasu was vastly inferior to him and pointed his sword at him. According to Kirihara, Yasu proved himself insignificant when he lost his composure in front of Ayaka. Only those of true greatness, like Kirihara himself, deserved to hold authority, as the weak tended to lose control. Kirihara didn't consider Yasu worthy of such power, despite his delusions of being classless. Blinded by rage, Yasu completely loses control, summoning the spirit of the sea and pointing accusingly at Ayaka. He uses her as an example of an S-class hero who has yet to learn a single skill, while others have already done so. He then brings up Asagi, a B-class hero who has managed to learn a unique skill that surpasses even Oyamada's. Yasu's point is clear. Rank doesn't determine strength. Furious at Yasu's display, Oyamada prepares to finish him off, but Kirihara steps in, ordering her to back down. Annoyed, Oyamada accuses Kirihara of being afraid, but he shoots her a look that makes it clear he's ready to humiliate her if necessary. After his dramatic display, Yasu retracts his mana aura, declaring that his true enemies are the weaklings around him. Kirihara agrees with Yasu on one thing. Ayaka isn't living up to her S-class status. He warns her to understand her place before it's too late. Arrogantly, Kirihara declares his greatness, so the weaker ones will know who's in charge before vanishing. Meanwhile, Ayaka learns from Kani that Kashima Kobato has gone missing. Eve Speed, noticing that Mimori is being chased by too many monsters, decides to pursue him. Mimori is clearly not in good shape. He's been the one sleeping the least since they arrived in the territory, and Eve suspects he's been using his sleep-inducing skill on the group so they could rest in peace. Cirrus adds that Teoka has been sacrificing his own sleep to keep morale up. The leopardess, acknowledging Mimori's efforts, insists that she should be fighting now, given her expertise in this terrain. Equipped with night vision, sharp hearing, and the strength to carry both Mimori and Slay if injured, her skills are vital. Sura agrees and grants her permission to join the battle. In the heat of the chase, Teoka uses Pijimaru to drive the monsters into a frenzy, causing a brawl among them. Watching the chaos, Teoka observes how the primal creatures are driven to kill rather than die. However, some regain their composure and resume their pursuit, forcing Taka to paralyze a few as he continues to flee. He realizes that the monsters are quickly adapting to his tentacle strikes, and his attacks haven't bought him much time. As rain begins to pour, muffling the sounds around him, Taka checks in with Pijimaru and Slay, both of whom are eager to continue. The rain reduces his ability to track the monsters by sight and sound, and with his mana rapidly depleting, he concludes that the only way to survive is to level up. To do so, he needs to kill the human faced beasts, which grant a lot of XP, but he must be close enough to earn it. Retracing his steps, Taka doubles back, driving several monsters mad and paralyzing them for more experience. Targeting one of the human-faced beasts, Taka kills it, instantly leveling up and restoring his mana. Now fully powered, he extends Pijimaru's tentacles and charges into battle again, repeating the strategy on another wave of monsters. But two enormous beasts begin chasing him, using others as shields to avoid his status effects. Teioka sneaks up from behind and uses paralysis and madness to finish them off, leveling up once more. As Taka dives into another horde, one of the creatures falls hard, causing Slay to trip and tumble. Surrounded by monsters, Teioka desperately unleashes his skills, consumed by a single thought, eliminating his enemies. Meanwhile, Kodo watches the battle and concludes that she isn't cut out for this. Despite witnessing Taka's suffering, all she could do was hide. Eve Speed arrives, sympathetic to Kodo's torment, and approaches to comfort her. At that moment, Itsuki, the one who walks with lightning, unlocks Stage 1 and attacks Speed. Though Eve resists the first blow, she is overwhelmed when Itsuki unlocks Stage 2. Struck down by the electricity, she recalls that these heroes were summoned by the goddess to defeat evil. In the midst of this realization, Itsuki delivers the final blow. Sarah comforts the young elf, reminding her of what Tuga had said about him being the one with the best chance of surviving the situation. Back to the leopard. Even though her movements are slowed, she manages to dodge the strike and block the following attacks. However, her opponent's intensity grows to the point where she can no longer evade. Just before she can land a blow, Itsuki is called by another companion, interrupting her mid-action. It's Hijiri, Itsuki's older sister. The younger sister asks why she was stopped, and the elder explains that the leopard isn't a mere monster, but an intelligent being with manners closer to humans. In other words, they can communicate with the creature. Zuki notes that the leopard hasn't spoken, but her companion suggests heroine's electricity might have affected its throat. With that, Itsuki apologizes for going too far in the fight, watching every movement of the newly arrived humans. Eve Speed remains cautious, but senses the women seem reasonable. These three remind the feline of someone from her past, so she sheathes her sword. Hijiri formally introduces herself, explaining that she and her comrades are humans from another world. She also mentions hearing about a missing leopard from the blood sport, and suspects Eve may be searching for someone she got separated from. Eve confirms she's looking for her master, and Hijiri concludes that her master must be very powerful to survive a monster stampede. Eve praises her insight, but insists her master can't be judged by simple measures. Afterward, Eve departs, leaving Hijiri intrigued by the blood sport athlete. Meanwhile, Tuka remains in the thick of battle, casting spells at the monsters until they are all dead. A colossal elephant-like creature arrives, but Tuka manages to control it using his sleep and poison abilities. After the battle, Tuka notices Pichimaru and Slay are exhausted, and he himself is injured from a rough fall. Checking his status, he sees he's reached level 2000, but despite his power, his energy and wounds won't heal. Feeling weak, he senses there's still a monster alive, one likely with a human-like appearance, hiding to avoid Tuka's abilities, which only work when his target is in sight. The monster soon reveals itself, shielding itself with others to avoid being hit. Tuka mounts Slay and rides away from the creature, demonstrating extreme superiority. The intelligent monster casts a spell that rains beams from the sky, nearly hitting the horse. Slay dodges, but one of the beams grazes Tuka's shoulder. Eventually, a beam pierces the horse's leg, causing it to collapse. In this dire situation, Tuka asks Pigamaru for one last favor. Surrounded by other creatures, the human-faced monster casts another spell. However, when the smoke clears, there's no one in sight. Suddenly, Tuka's mask is thrown into the battlefield, distracting the monster, which shoots at a decoy created by Pigamaru. Slay then diverts the monster's focus, allowing Tuka to attack from above, paralyzing the enemy and casting the madness spell. With the monster defeated, Tuka explains that he used his mask as bait to trick the opponent while he gained a full view to strike. Despite the victory, Tuka feels his shoulder ache and checks his status, realizing he's in critical condition. Though he levels up to 2019 and unlocks a new advanced ability, his injuries are too severe to celebrate. As he tries to rejoin the group, he notices red eyes in the forest. Before he can react, a giant wolf attacks but is swiftly killed by Eve's speed, who gathers her injured master and continues the journey. Eve recalls meeting the heroines Hijiri, Itsuki Takayo, and a girl named Kashima Kobato. She chose not to mention Tuka's name to them, knowing he wants to remain dead to his classmates, as they could become obstacles in his quest for revenge against the goddess Vicious. Eventually, the group safely reunites. Back at the cave, Eve volunteers to stand guard while the others rest. Tuka stitches up his clothes but can't sleep, still processing everything. Ashrain offers him her lap to rest on, and after some hesitation, he accepts. Recalling a similar moment from his childhood with his aunt, the elf touches his face, reminding him not to carry the world's weight alone. She fears Tuka will take on too many responsibilities and break under the pressure. He asks her to support him through whatever comes. Tuka begins to remember the attacks he endured as a child, slowly regaining the person he used to be. Ashrain reassures him that he can call on her anytime, and he realizes what it feels like to have an older sister. As they talk, Ashrain reveals she's 19, surprising Tuka, who assumed elves lived for centuries. She thought he was older because of his calm demeanor, but acknowledges he's still their leader and king of the Lord of Flies warriors. Soon after, Tuka falls asleep, and the elf, feeling something she's never felt before, gently kisses him before quickly pulling away, scolding herself for the act. Later, when Tuka wakes and notices Ashrain can't sleep, he offers to use his sleep ability on her, and she agrees. As he reflects on his vulnerability, the heroines continue their journey, with Itsuki questioning why Kashima is part of Asagi's group instead of Ayaka's. This brings back memories of Kashima's trial to join the team. Faced with a monster she was supposed to kill, she hesitated, so the leader took her sword and ended the creature's life. Despite this, Asagi passed her and included her in the group for reasons that may have been more sinister than just adding a warrior. After hearing about the trial, Itsuki remarks that Asagi has a dangerous aura, but the girl believes that might be exactly what saves Ayaka when the time comes. The next morning, Cirrus confides to Momori that she'll confess something to him one day, but at the moment, she doesn't have the courage and needs more time. Momori understands and continues on his way, while the elf reflects that if she confesses her feelings, she might lose her master's trust. Still, she knows that one day she'll have to tell him, even if it risks their relationship. Teoka, on the other hand, believes that as long as Ashrain hasn't noticed what he already knows, things will be fine for now. Sarah, determined to be her king's sword, stands firm, while Tuka plans to maintain their relationship as lord and elf. Later, they encounter a magical seal, the kind that triggers traps under specific conditions. However, Since the formula is damaged, the trap shouldn't activate. Tuka hopes the witch isn't dead, as the deteriorating forest traps could indicate a larger issue. Similar seals are scattered around, and one is triggered, bringing a stone golem to life. Teoka quickly paralyzes it, but chooses not to destroy the creature, wanting to avoid appearing hostile to the witch. Their journey leads them into the witch's domain, where no monsters are present. In a cabin by a lake, Eve finds a hidden basement under a rug, where small golems work peacefully without aggression. Inside, Toka opens a door by channeling mana into its magical compartment, noticing that the witch didn't bother concealing it, as it requires an enormous amount of mana to activate. The door opens. Meanwhile, the heroines return to the group. Just as Kashima is about to hug Ayaka, Asagi steps in, hugging her first and informing her that the four saints are still searching for her. Thankfully, she has returned safely. As Asagi leaves, Kashima reflects on her shyness and naivety, realizing she needs to become stronger. Hijiri reassures her sister that rescuing Kashima was the right decision, believing the dead soldiers they found in the forest were planning to execute the Class 2 students. If Kashima had died, Ayaka would have been emotionally devastated, affecting all the heroes. Upon crossing the door, the Lord of Flies warriors encounter an underground sky with a real breeze, as if they've entered another dimension. On a mountain, a woman with a scepter walks along the veranda of her home. She is the Witch of Taboos, the only one capable of deciphering the scroll of forbidden magic, which holds the key to Taioka Momori's revenge against the goddess Vicious. Meanwhile, Vicious orders the four saints to bring the heroes back immediately, as demonic forces are gathering. She eagerly anticipates seeing how strong her envoys have become. Returning to the protagonists, the Witch of Taboos introduces herself as Erica, while Teoka can barely contain his anticipation for revenge against his greatest enemy. This brings an end to Season 1. Thanks for watching my recaps.